Why is it that basically every single great civilization in human history, no matter how incredibly powerful it gets, inevitably crumbles? You know, it's a question that has honestly haunted historians for centuries. But what if the blueprint for this entire cycle of rise and ruin was actually mapped out perfectly over 600 years ago? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're exploring a seriously brilliant, groundbreaking 14th century sociological framework designed by the legendary Arab scholar Ibn Khaldun. He figured out exactly why empires rise and fall, and his answer? It actually has absolutely nothing to do with economics or advanced technology.
To figure out why the greatest empires always collapse, we actually have to look away from the grand palaces and those towering city walls. Ibn Khaldun argued that the answer lies in the exact opposite direction. You have to look at the harshness, the brutality, and the absolute unforgiving nature of the desert. He realized that the real engine of human history is driven by this dynamic tension between the nomadic desert dweller and the settled city dweller.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp his framework, we have to establish the stark contrast between humanity's two baseline environments. First, you've got the Bedouin, or nomadic life, and it is overwhelmingly harsh. The people are incredibly self-reliant, constantly alert, and driven entirely by absolute survival necessities. Then, on the flip side, we have the urban or sedentary life, which is defined by absolute comfort. The people there are dependent on others, they get complacent, and their whole society becomes focused on luxuries, crafts, and just hoarding wealth. Ibn Khaldun makes the point that nomadic life actually precedes urban life. The hard desert is the root, and the soft city is just the branch.
It's wild how the physical environment fundamentally shapes human character right down to its core. Take courage, for instance. Because nomads live out in the wide open, they can't exactly outsource their protection to a massive stone wall or a hired guard. They have to be their own security. So courage just becomes second nature. Meanwhile, the city dweller relies entirely on governors and mercenaries. It's honestly kind of like the 14th century equivalent of us panicking when the Wi-Fi drops and waiting for a food delivery app to bring dinner while we hide under the bed. Over time, Ibn Khaldun observes, this urban environment corrupts character. The constant pursuit of pleasure, complex trade, and extreme luxury literally pulls people away from their natural raw goodness and breathes deceit and weakness.
Listen to how Ibn Khaldun himself puts it, straight from the source text. Quote, "Urbanites throw themselves onto the bed of rest and tranquility and entrust their defense to their governor and the walls that surround them." This essentially lays the academic groundwork for that famous modern saying you hear all the time, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men. He's pointing out that urban life literally strips away a population's self-reliance. Because when you don't have to defend yourself, you completely forget how to do it.
So we know the physical environment is brutal, right? But what is the psychological engine that actually keeps the Bedouin alive? How do wandering tribes survive out in the wasteland, battling starvation and predators on a daily basis? Well, it all comes down to a really fundamental human social instinct. The answer is a concept that is absolutely central to our explainer today. It's an Arabic term called Asabiyyah. Now, you can translate this as social cohesion, group feeling, or unbreakable tribal solidarity. But in this framework, it isn't just a feeling, it's the ultimate social instinct. It is the absolute bedrock of tribal organization, literally a tangible superpower. It's the social gravity that dictates exactly who wins and who loses in the grand sweep of history. It's this invisible glue that makes a group of individuals act as a single, unstoppable organism.
So what actually creates this Asabiyyah? Well, it starts with pure bloodlines and close lineage. Because of the extreme isolation of the desert, family ties remain unmixed and incredibly tight. Add to that the shared struggles in such a harsh environment. I mean, when you suffer together, you bond together, right? They also build these strategic alliances, where an outsider is brought into the fold and treated exactly like blood. But ultimately, it's forged by a shared defensive necessity. Out in the open desert, an attack on one single member of the tribe is immediately treated as a mortal threat to everyone. You simply cannot survive without this fierce, united front.
Which brings us to the ultimate historical turning point. What happens when this unbreakable, super-hungry tribal cohesion meets the fractured, comfortable, and luxurious city? Think about it. You have this group of people forged in the harshest fires of survival, looking across the horizon at a society that has grown incredibly wealthy, but is fundamentally soft and totally undefended by its own citizens. And the result? It's what Ibn Khaldun calls the inevitable conquest. The Bedouins, who possess vastly superior Asabiyyah and martial prowess, just effortlessly overwhelm the sedentary societies. Those giant city walls and the expensive hired mercenaries are absolutely no match for a unified tribe that fears nothing and fights as one bloodline. The cycle of history turns, and the nomads become the new masters of the empire.
But how do they actually pull it off tactically? Well, because of their harsh upbringing, Bedouin fighters are highly mobile. They are devastatingly effective on flat plains where they can maneuver really quickly. Though Ibn Khaldun does note they tend to avoid heavily fortified mountain terrains, places that require slow, grinding sieges. Furthermore, their Asabiyyah is very often supercharged by a single unifying religious or tribal calling. And let's not forget their core motivation here. They are fiercely driven by the pursuit of the very wealth, resources, and luxury they were entirely deprived of out in the desert.
But here is where we encounter the great tragic irony of human history, the trap of luxury. The victorious nomads take over the city. They claim the palaces, the wealth, the abundant food. But the very prize the tribe fought so hard to win becomes the literal poison that will eventually destroy them. By moving out of the desert and settling into the city, they have unknowingly planted the seeds of their own destruction.
Ibn Khaldun actually maps this downfall out perfectly with his famous three-generation rule of dynastic decay. Let's walk through this step by step, because it's fascinating. Generation 1, the tough conquerors. These are the founders. They still retain their desert edge, their raw bravery, and they share the glory of conquest together. But then comes Generation 2, the sedentary inheritors. They grew up in the palace, right? Not the desert. The ruler starts to hoard power, pushing away his tribal brothers. Luxury sets in, and that vital Asabiyyah begins to weaken. Finally, Generation 3, the soft elites. This generation has completely forgotten the harsh life of the desert. They are consumed by luxury, utterly defenseless on their own, and entirely reliant on hired mercenaries. At this stage, the whole empire is ripe to fall.
Just look at the tragic contrast between the first and third generation. The grandfather who built the empire, shared power, feared absolutely nothing, and utilized the immense power of social cohesion to build a state. But just 2 generations later, the grandson sits on the throne. He fears everything, including his own people. He relies entirely on foreign mercenaries to protect him, and ultimately, he loses the state to a new, hungry tribe emerging from the desert.
There's a quote from the source text that just hits the nail on the head here. He writes of this later generation. They become a burden on the state. They forget the protection and defense that was their nature. In this framework, luxury literally breaks the human spirit. It completely severs the vital ties of social cohesion. They're no longer a united tribe. They are just a collection of individuals consuming resources until someone stronger comes along.
So, when you put it all together, what we get is this predictable, almost biological timeline for the life cycle of a civilization. According to Ibn Khaldun, this cycle lasts roughly 120 years. At year 0, you have the tribal conquest with peak Asabiyyah. By year 40, you hit the second generation, consolidation, peak wealth, and the beginnings of real luxury. By year 80, the third generation takes over, bringing decay, fading cohesion, and total reliance on those mercenaries. And by year 120, the cycle reaches complete collapse. The empire is weak, and a new tribe with fresh Asabiyyah sweeps in to conquer, resetting the clock right back to 0.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy, provocative question to end on today. When you look at the structure of Ibn Khaldun's 120-year cycle, when you look at that progression from harsh, unified struggle to complacent, divided luxury, where does our current society sit on this timeline? Have we lost our Asabiyyah, our social instinct and cohesion? Are we the soft elites of our own era, entirely dependent on complex systems we no longer really understand or defend, just waiting for the cycle of history to inevitably reset itself? It's a fascinating lens through which to view not just the 14th century, but our world today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the history happening all around you.